Welcome to the In-Between, where shift happens. This podcast is for anybody who has ever found themselves in that space in between what was and what's going to be. That space where life happens. The moment between where we are and where we're going. That space that is often uncomfortable to sit in. The stuff of life, the ups, the downs, the moments of connection and insight, and the moments where we can't see two steps in front of us. We will ask all the questions, maybe find some answers, and generally work at being okay in the mystery of the in-between. And today, we are talking about relationships. Yay, relationships. We love relationships.
Ooh, relationships.
Yeah. I think that's like one of everyone's most favorite topics to talk about. Is being in being in relationship with other people. Because it's so easy all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So simple. It's so simple. All right. So if you are new to this or just need the reminder, the way this podcast works is we both agree on a topic in advance, kind of in advance. Today was only a little in advance. But only one of us knows the questions. So today I have come with the questions. Ryan has never seen them or heard them. And so we're just going to jump in and see where the conversation goes. It's usually pretty fun. Just kind of that authentic conversation where it's not, there's no preparation, right? We're not like coming with pre-prepared answers here.
It's both freeing and terrifying at the same time.
Yes. So talk about being in relationship. Talk about being in the in-between, right? Like
right.
That squidgy middle of not knowing and being okay in that uncomfortableness of not knowing. Yeah. So here we go. Let's jump into this about relationships because I think there's probably so much to say. So why is it that relationships always seem like such a hot topic? Like always, probably throughout time, relationships is like the real deal conversation.
Well, I think it's because that's, from my perspective, that's how we experience the world. So we're always in relationship with something or to something or someone or an experience, right? So, I mean, that's the only way that we can move about the world in each of our individualized expressions, right? So we come into the world, boom, we are automatically thrust into relationship with everything, with our environment, with the people in our environment, with our own emotions, with our, like, all the things, right? Our own desires, our own wants, our own needs. And so I think it's always a hot topic because it's something that we're always doing.
Right.
And I think too is like how we relate to things are different. Like we relate to certain people differently than other people, or certain situations differently than other situations. And we also, like, all that changes, like from one day to the next based on our own internal relationship to things, right?
Oh,
Or I'm tired or hungry or annoyed, right? It just shifts. So I think it's always a topic because we're always doing it, and it's something that's not static. It's always changing. It's fluid, and so we have to like recalibrate ourselves all the time. I think.
That sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting, and I think right, and I think that sometimes we feel that exhaustion, especially when we're in situations or relationships that are particularly challenging, or where we have to constantly recalibrate ourselves. We're constantly checking ourselves in relationship to that person. Oftentimes we see those as toxic relationships, right? And it's always like, energy sucking and not energy giving. That's a good spotlight for, let me think about like my relationship to this thing. And it can be a thing, or it could be a circumstance, or it could be a job, or it could be a role, like all those things. So I think that's why it's up, because it's just part of who we are. It's part of our experience in life. And I think we're constantly trying to like navigate it in a ways that are supportive.
Yeah. I love that because I think it's a different, at least for me, it's a slightly different take on how I have tended to view relationships. I think, like in my mind, at least in the past, this has probably shifted more recently, but in the past, like a relationship was a thing, like a static entity.
Yeah.
And that was who we were to each other, and that was it. Like husband, wife, father, son, mother, son, cousins, work, colleagues,
Right.
whatever. Like we were that thing, and that was it. It was solidified, and it should be the way that relationship is supposed to be, whatever that means. But to think about it, like you're saying, that relationship is like the activity, is the action, is how
Yeah.
we are showing up. Like, yeah, from moment one, like your relationship to breathing, your relationship to coming into this world, like in a lot of ways, like what a traumatic way to enter.
Oh, yeah, it's not a slide in easy way to enter.
No, it's yeah. But that's like a totally, I would think a totally different way of looking at relationship than culturally, societally, most of us tend to think about it. Um, I don't know why, like it brings me back to like some like elementary school class where they're talking about like relationships of just like people, like your relationship to this other person. And it is a very static, predefined, concrete thing rather than a fluid and change. Yeah, I like that idea. Like I'm not the me I was yesterday
Yeah.
or 5 minutes ago, because I've had the experience of the last 5 minutes now that I didn't
Right.
have 5 minutes ago, or I didn't have the last 24 hours yesterday. Um,
I think
which,
we're conditioned to think it's like, relationships are like object based. Like the static object. It is the
yeah,
thing, the entity like you're talking about.
yeah, and it's supposed to, like, at least for me, it has in the past often felt like we're supposed to achieve a certain level of
Yeah.
closeness or whatever. Like we're gonna reach a certain level. We're gonna, we'll reach the boss level, we'll fight the boss, and then we're fine. Like we're good. Once we got there, we've beaten the game, we're good. Um, and yet I will say that in the 15 years of marriage, that has never been the case. Yeah, like there have been many boss levels.
And
There's
will
somehow
continue
always,
to be, and will
yeah,
continue to be,
yeah,
yeah.
there's somehow always more. Um, yeah. So I don't want
Oh,
to
what
say too much before I get into the next question,
well,
because
I
I
wanna
think,
say, you just said that there's always more, and I think that's the thing. There's always something more because in our own self-expression, there's always something more. And
yeah,
that doesn't mean, like, better or whatever, but there is always that next layer and that
yeah,
integration of that experience or that processing of this thing,
yeah,
which then creates more space, but you know what I'm saying,
yep,
metaphorically, more
yep,
space. And so then, of course, as we show up with more space, then we bring that more space to our relationships, whether they're new or historical relationships. And then that creates, then integrating into that is then more space. So it's like this, that there's always going to be more, right? And so I
yeah,
think that we do get this, when we think about like even like spirituality and things like that, it's not destination based. Same with relationships.
yeah,
Not destination based. It's like it's process based. And so if we're stuck on a destination, we're always going to be disappointed.
yeah,
If we are open to the process, then we're always going to be surprised,
yep, yep,
both in ways that are pleasant and maybe some ways that aren't, right?
yeah. And doesn't it require like a willingness from everybody involved in that relationship to have
Yeah.
at least a recognition of that evolution, that shift, that change? Like it is not static. And so if any one of us or either one of us wants it to be, or even subconsciously assumes that it is a static thing,
Yeah.
and we're not static beings, like
No.
we're different moment to moment, like you were saying, like depending on how much sleep you've had, depending on whether you're hungry, depending on what
Oh,
meeting you
yeah.
just came out of, depending on, like all of the things, let alone like everything else that's going on in the world. We show up as different, I want to say different people. We're the same person, but we show up differently as that person, moment to moment, day to day, certainly month to month, year to year. Uh, So the next question that comes up for me is kind of similar to the first one. So like relationships have been hot topic probably since like the dawn of time, because like
Since there was more than one person.
since there was more than one person. Well, yeah, I mean, even being in relationship to the earth, to existence, to breathing, right? But certainly since there was more than one person, I think has made it, it doubles the challenge.
Yeah.
But it also seems like currently where we are in history, like right now, that there is like an added level of challenge, an added level of difficulty, an added level of like tension in life in general and how we relate to it, which so our relationship to each other, to life, to all the things, um, seems to be gaining tension and not lessening the tension. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what's the difference between how relationship has always shown up and why it's always been a hot topic and how it's showing up now? Like, what's different now in life that is potentially making relationships more challenging? Or maybe less, I don't know. Maybe there are some things that are making it less challenging. I'm not sure.
I think the thing that pops out, like, comes like straight to mind about how, relationships, or our challenge with them, or what our experience of them is different now than maybe it has been in the past, historically, 100 years, 200 years ago, is that if you look at historically how we have grouped ourselves, like hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, it's like these kind of small sort of groups. And so you interacted with that group or with that experience, right? You get pretty used to that. But now, with we have the ability to have a relationship with anyone in the world at any time.
Right.
Right, through our technology, through expanding ways of connecting,
That's so many
through
people.
yeah, well, yeah, and through expanding ways of what community can look like, right? A community has shifted. So the community is no longer just your little everybody that lives on your road, right? My grandparents, their house is on like this one road in rural North Carolina, and everyone is related.
The
Like,
one road. Yeah.
like I'm related to everyone on this road.
Yeah.
Probably not so much anymore because most of those people are gone now. But right, and so
Yeah.
now we have this ability to have relationship and community with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different perspectives, lots of different experiences, maybe different than our own. So that creates some challenges when we're trying to interact or trying to navigate or work with people with lots of different life experiences, because like those edges rub against our edges and our own perspectives, right? And so I think that our the readiness and our ability to have community really anywhere, I think really is an added I mean, it's beautiful, and it also adds to the challenge because then we are inundated with experiences and perspectives that are different from our own, which was wonderful. And so that it causes us to always keep our own perspective in check. And maybe that's not something we have been used to doing in the past, right? So we have to keep our own perspective that, oh, my perspective isn't the only one. And we have to constantly remind ourselves of that in our interactions. So I think that it can be challenging. I think the readiness in which we see the global challenges, right? I think that also brings a layer because that brings to light a lot of things that, one, we didn't think existed, or two, we thought, oh, we solved that a long time ago, or we have never seen it. It's just been buried for hundreds of years, right? And so now we are seeing it like full force because we can't bury this shit anymore.
Yeah.
We can't pretend it doesn't exist because, you used to, we could pretend it didn't exist because if I can't see it, it's not happening to me, but you can.
Or didn't even.
Right.
I don't know.
So, I mean,
maybe didn't even know, right? Like we have probably for the first time in history a generation or two of people who existed in that like close-knit community
Yeah.
style where news took a week or two to reach all the different remote places. So
Yeah.
like you really were like in your community, and also simultaneously, so we have those generations who lived that, and now we have a generation or two who are born since like the global connection of the internet, especially things like TikTok now. Like we have kids that have never not known things like TikTok or Instagram, where there are like live
It's
videos of
instant.
people
Yeah.
everywhere in the world, live videos of war, live videos of just daily life, live videos of, you can imagine it, and it's out there and people are watching it and connecting in different kind of ways. And so we do have like that combining, merging, smashing together of like
Yeah.
people who
It,
I think that could probably be scary to have lived a life where everything was one way and you knew it because it had always been that
yeah.
way,
Yeah.
and then be like forced into seeing it ain't that way. And here's everyone showing you that it's not that way. I can
Well,
imagine that being really challenging.
I think the reality of that, I think, is that we are having to, it's like this evolutionary, it's like the world, like our own biology and our evolutionary ways of interacting have not caught up to what we're experiencing,
Yeah,
right? But I think that we're becoming more and more, as we are connected in ways that we have never been connected before, we're beginning to learn, okay, now how do I interact in this iteration? And I think,
yeah,
and we've seen this like even in, well, let's just take for example like spiritual communities. Like the spiritual community of pre 2020 is different than it is now. I think it was always kind of headed in that direction,
sure.
but I think it, that kind of catapulted it, and so we are seeing that we then have to shift the way that we interact.
Yeah,
Same with relationships, right? I mean, same with those, all those day-to-day relationships. We have to shift the way we interact, the way we communicate, the way we relate to one another, and
yeah,
that's not good or bad, it's just the reality of that.
yep,
And it's, yeah, so I think that is why, uh, we're it's almost like we're just getting our feet wet on how do we interact and engage
yeah,
in this way, or how do we build relationships, how do we build community, how do we build connection and belonging, because all those things can be built other than in-person sort of stuff, right? We know
yeah,
that, right? I mean, we're
yeah,
a little biased, but I mean that's true, and and I think it's just challenging because I think we are, like you said, I mean it's like real time.
yeah,
It's almost like we're for the first time, like, experiencing life in real time instead of,
right?
like, this kind of delayed,
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and it doesn't give us the ability to, like, create our own narrative that matches our belief system, our unconscious beliefs, our conscious beliefs,
Yeah,
whatever, right? It's like, we don't have that opportunity
yeah,
with real-time life from across the globe,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and like you mentioned the word it, catapulting a moment ago about, like, 2020 kinda catapulted spiritual community forward. It also kind of feels like our like, collectively, the evolution of humanity has
Yeah,
been catapulted forward, like, we didn't quite make the jump, we didn't quite take the steps enough on our own early enough. Those steps became like hops, we didn't all take those enough. Those hops became jumps and leaps, and now it's like, it feels like this huge gap that we're trying to make up, and I think that might play into some of why it feels so, um chaotic, like, it's like life after life after life after life,
yeah.
like, all this stuff just happening.
I
Um,
wonder if it's because, and I'm just throwing this out there, and I don't know this, I mean, when we throughout our lives, we have this relationship to life, and we have this relationship to our own mortality, which actually informs our life, right? So that relationship to our own mortality,
yeah,
is what gives texture to our life. I wonder if,
right.
what we've experienced over the past few years was this collective awareness of our own mortality. our own fragility, our own, like, dot in space.
Or a desire to not see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think but
Yeah.
I think there
Yeah.
is this awareness
Yeah.
of, like, that we are not the masters of the
Yes.
universe,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that it's really interesting. And so what happens is when there's that a collective event that really puts that into question, you have a little bit of like, whoa, oh, a little wobble. We got a
Right.
little wobbleness, right? Which can show up as fear. It could show up as chaos. It could show up as conflict. It could show up as projection of all those things into our experience. And
Yeah.
I wonder, like, from that wobbling, because I still think we're wobbling, from
Mhm.
that wobbling,
Mhm.
if what is born is a more um, expanded understanding of who we are in relationship to all of this. Um, I don't know.
I would think it would almost have to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it has for me individually. I just wonder, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
collectively, it's really interesting
Hmm.
to wonder what the byproduct of this will be collectively, because I think that we
Oh,
will
yeah. Yeah.
see the ripples of this for generations to come, right?
Yeah.
Just like the ripples
Just
of,
yeah.
you know, you think about like 9/11, that collective experience, or any collective experience of war, World War I, World War II, like those, any of those collective experiences
Right.
really have ripple effects for generations.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see what the ripple effect of our collective
L
experience that
yeah.
we've
Like,
had.
life literally changed in ways that we will probably never know. It'll be
Yeah.
generations after us studying this, they'll be like,
Which
"Wow."
then the earth changes, right?
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
universe changes. Like, it's like these changes are not just on one level.
Yeah.
Which also supports this fact of relationships,
Right.
right?
Right.
That one thing is in relationship to another.
And we don't have the relationship with the universe that we thought we had.
Right.
Like you said, like, we're not the masters of the universe. And so to kinda, bring this to my next question, because I think within New Thought circles, there has certainly been a, like, colonizer mindset that, like, we are
Mm,
the masters of our experience and the life that we are creating, the life you create for yourself, and,
yeah,
like, we are the masters of the universe because I said so, or somebody else said so, or whatever,
right.
right? Um, and so when relationship comes into play with that mindset, it's like, well, you should just be able to create whatever relationship you want. And so there's been all this talk of like law of attraction for like, I don't know, however long, and it probably came into more of a cultural perspective with what was that movie? The Secret, or it was a book, or I don't know, whatever it was. Awful movie, awful book. um, Mainly because I think the ramifications of it were like this, like, vague misunderstanding of how universal principle actually exists.
Right.
And like, so there's this idea of law of attraction, and I think the common understanding is like, I am the master of my experience, and so I'm going to attract into my life the exact right and perfect person because that's what I want, right? And yet I don't know that it really works that way. I think it works more like we attract people into our lives
Yeah.
based on how we are. Um,
Is there a
so
question? Did I miss the
no,
question?
no,
Okay, okay, all right,
I'm
I'm getting there.
finding my way to it because it's not
Okay.
exactly how I had it written down. Um, our conversation like shifts the questions a bit because it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
kind of answer that part of the question,
I
but
thought I
there's like
missed
another
something.
part of the question that's like,
Okay, good.
um,
We're digging for it. It's
yeah,
coming.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's coming. It's coming. I guess the question is, so if law of attraction is not, we are the masters of the universe, what is like the proper understanding? I don't know. What's like what is the law of attraction a real thing? Is it different than how it has been discussed, commonly understood? And I guess more importantly, like, why does it seem like we attract the same people into our lives over and over and over again?
I think I think the what happens is this misunderstanding, or this, I don't even know what to call it, of this idea of law of attraction is this kind of going back to what we talked about, that it's something that is static, that it's a thing. It is a thing, an entity that exerts itself on our experience. And that it's like an oversimplistic. I think that's the issue with the law of attraction, is that it's oversimplistic as to how it works. So we know that, let's just take this conversation about relationships. If I continue to show up in a relationship the same way, we will continue to have the same relationship. Right? And so the same with life. If I continue to put my attention on, or my values on, or if I continue to show up to life or to in relationships the same way, I will continue to have the same relationships, and the things will continue to show up. Right. So it's like, when you've dated the same person, like it's like same person, different hair, right? That's what I always call it. Because what happens is we show up to the relationship the same way until we realize, oh, wow, I'm the one that's showing up to this relationship differently. And then when we begin to show up differently, put our focus, our attention, our values, shift our beliefs around something, shift our ways of showing up, then the way things show up in our relationship to them changes. So that's kind of like, that's the law of well, I hate even saying law of attraction, but that is just the way things work. That is the nature of things. And so I think that, I mean, I don't know if there's a correct or right way, but I think that is a more accurate way of how this shows up. And I love that you talked about, like, especially in New Thought and some of these, change your thinking, change your life, those sorts of things, or that we can, everyone needs to hear this, so we can change the world, that sort of thing. This colonizer mindset where we want to change things without being changed ourselves. And that is the static colonizer mindset. That I've got it, I'm going to go change something, but I don't want to be changed or have to shift based on my experience or based on my relationship, right? And so I think that does play into our understanding of relationships too, because we want other people to show up. We want other people to change and shift. We don't want to do that,
right.
And so I think it is a balance of understanding our own role in our relationship to others and to life, and that, yes, we can shift how our relationship to the experiences of our lives. Now, here's the thing, like, people are like, oh, we can just change our lives and change our experiences. Well, there are, and we know this, systems and frameworks that are actively working against folks. It doesn't matter what thought I have, right? Or what thought someone else may have who is oppressed or marginalized in our society. We're still in frameworks, right? But what happens is that we can change our relationship to our experiences, and then that
and I would add
and then that in turn changes our experience because we have shifted our relationship to it.
I would add to that, usually slowly over time. We can change.
Yeah. I mean, it can happen instantaneously, but let's be honest.
But usually,
usually it is a shift up, default thinking. Oh, wait, up, shift. Oh, wait, I'm back into that again, right? I've had that too, of like wanting to show up intentionally. And I think that's the thing, intention, being more intentional and more mindful. And then something happens, I get off balance, I get tired, hungry, all the things, hangry, and then I'm right back in that default. Right back in that default. So we always, I think, are having to check ourselves.
Yeah. And I think also the going back to that whole like catapulting forward idea, I think part of that catapulting forward of our own collective humanity is we're being catapulted into like a new way of being together, new way of being in relationship. And so I think it's been really easy in the past for this idea of like, you're responsible for how you show up in a relationship. That perspective has come from a very, like you said, that colonizer mindset, that very me and mine perspective. And so does everyone else should change. Everyone else, every other part of my relationship should change. I don't want to change. Like, both of those things have, through the perspective of the colonizer mindset, can be very blame and shame
Yeah.
esque, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're to blame, you change so I don't have to. Or if I take responsibility, like, for anyone really trying to take responsibility, I think the default understanding has been like, oh, well, then I'm to blame for
Yeah.
this thing. I think moving forward, it's more of a, we are in relationship together. Like, both people are being asked to show up and take responsibility for what they're bringing to the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
rather than like, take responsibility for how you show up.
Yeah.
Like, it's a really, it feels like a subtle shift in a way, but I think it's actually a huge shift, because it's not like you're to blame, you put yourself in that bad relationship,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's not your fault that that person's an asshole or they're abusive or whatever. And I think we end up in those kind of situations for probably like predictable and specific reasons, that I think we learn at really, really young ages, right? Like,
Yeah.
our childhood development plays a huge role in the kind of relationships we end up in, until we become conscious of the habits and patterns and beliefs
Yeah.
put us in those
Sigh.
yeah. But and like, no one's taught that. Like, we don't get taught those kind of things.
Yeah.
Maybe you take a psychology class in like college, and maybe you start to piece together a few things, or maybe you
Oh, that's
find a
20 years after it's already happened too.
right.
Right.
Yeah, you've been doing it for
Right.
but I do think that that early childhood development plays a huge role in the unhealthy relationships later, that we so often we then take the blame for,
Yeah.
instead of realizing that, like, it's not a me versus you. Like, we're both in this relationship, either, or it's, I mean, it could be a really unhealthy relationship and it just needs to end. Like, that is totally
Right.
possible too. um and I think we repeat that relationship until we realize it's a really unhealthy relationship and we need to do a thing different. um and we're not responsible for that person, who they are and how they showed up.
Yeah.
I think when we engage in healthier relationships, I get to show up and create a space. Like, I think this is the 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 healthier version of this perspective, right? So instead of like, you're to blame, you take responsibility for everything in your experience. I think the healthier version of that is, I get to show up in a relationship, and because I show up in a certain way, it creates a certain space that's going to get that has a tendency to be filled by other people who fit that space,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so the space, what space do I want to create? That what am I looking to have join me in this space? And then the other person in the relationship gets the opportunity to do the same thing. So if we're both aware of that, then it's like, we get to create a space as deep as we want, where we get to show up as authentically as we feel comfortable. And like, kind of bring this all full circle, I think that whole shifting, changing, evolution thing, we get
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to continually go deeper and deeper and deeper in that relationship
Yeah.
together. Like, I'm not going deeper in that relationship for myself. Yeah, I get to learn things, I get to change, I get to be more authentic, whatever. But it's like, we are doing that together. And I don't know why like, that's such an obvious thing. Like, hey, in our relationship, we get to do this together. And yet, I don't know that that is necessarily that obvious of a thing,
Yeah.
based on how we've been discussing relationship, or how life has taught us about relationships. I don't know that most people have we are in this together mentality in a lot of relationships.
Right. Yeah.
So my next question then, and I think this is going to be the last one before we wrap up, is what does like the average listener need to understand about their childhood development, or about childhood development in general, in order to begin creating healthier relationships, or to continue deeper relationships? Maybe they've already started healthier relationships. What's like the one thing we need to understand about our childhood development if we want to create healthy relationships as an adult?
Well, I think it's just this understanding that we learn how to be in relationship from an early age, right? Because we have no choice. I mean, we're in this situation. We are dependent on the people around us for survival and all those sorts of things. So we absorb the interactions, we absorb the relationships, we observe like when I do this, this person does that, or all those things that we learn, and some of that is amazing. I mean, I think some people have really amazing and supportive uh, experiences, and then some people don't. And so I think just to be aware, especially if you're showing up in a certain way in relationships, or having the same relationship, or the same what a challenge, whatever, just to stop and look back and say, even asking the questions, what have I learned historically about this type of interaction? Where have I learned this from? Whom have I learned this from?
Yeah.
Right. And then begin to like, oh, okay. When I was this age, this experience happened to me and it really shifted my relationship to the world around me, or my relationship to authority, or my ability to trust in a situation. Right. And so I think just being aware of that very early on, our ingrained ways of interacting are influenced.
Yeah.
And then asking the questions. And then when those answers come to the surface, oh, okay, well, then how can I begin to then step from that space, wherever it may be, into another space, or continue, right? I mean, if we've had positive experience, we want to continue to build on those. And so I think it's just asking the question, being aware, and then shifting and moving with intention in the direction that we want to go and how we want to show up in relationships.
Yeah. 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 All right. So one takeaway from today's conversation.
Just one. Wow.
One only one.
I think that it's just this, and I don't know that this is something that is new to me, but I think that for me, it is that reminder that relationships are not static. I am not static. We collectively are not static. And so to begin to have less of a tight grip on my own expectation of others in relationships, because they're not static. They've changed. I've changed. Right. And so I think for me, it's just holding this experience of relationships um, with a little bit more grace. I know we don't talk a lot about grace, but I think a little bit more grace
Yeah.
of, wow, we're all in motion, right? We're all in motion. Our relationships are individually, collectively, everything is in motion. And so, yeah, hell, that's hard when we're trying to navigate in a static way to things that are always in motion.
Yeah.
And so I think it is for me being more okay with the motion and less attached to it having to be static. That's my takeaway.
Yeah. That was going to be mine.
Stole it.
Yeah. But actually, as you were talking, I got this really cool image in my mind. In a lot of classes, in a lot of like spiritual based classes, they use the analogy of your mind being a garden, and saying like, you got to tend your own garden kind of thing. But I got this image of a relationship being a garden, that like the two of us, this is our garden that we're planting and we're responsible for. And it takes both of us to mind that garden.
Yeah.
It can't just be one of us, and it can't be neither of us. And so like we are collectively, the both of us are growing the things in this garden. And so it's like taking whole responsibility of the relationship and also being clear on what is what is mine to bring to the relationship. So yeah, we're minding our gardens.
Minding the garden.
Minding the garden.
Love it.
Yeah. All right, folks. So certainly some moments of in-betweenness in relationships. So
Yes.
I hope that this brought you some insight into some of your own relationships, some of your own thoughts, some of your own beliefs, some of the things going on in your life, or anything else. But certainly a lot of in-betweening going on here and going on for all of us when we really sit down and look at it. So lots to take away. The cool thing is it's all recorded. You can go back and listen to it again. I think
and
I might.
And
again.
Yeah. And again.
Yeah. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And until we see you next time, hope you find yourself being okay in the uncomfortableness of the in-between.
Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between, but thanks for being here anyway. We may not have found all of the answers, but certainly some. And maybe more importantly, a little shift has happened. Because that is really what it's all about. Learning to be curious, authentic, and yes, maybe even a tad bit vulnerable. And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between. So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.